Okay, I think we're ready.
Hi guys, and welcome to this week's tutorial. In fact, I think we've done 2 this week, so you're very, very lucky. More about where I am in a minute, and I'll tell you why I'm here, but I think it kind of underpins and supports the message that I want to get across this week. Now, what are we going to talk about this week? We're going to talk about obsolescence. Now, as most of you are engineers, and I'm an engineer, the question of obsolescence comes up frequently, and obsolescence conjures different images in people's minds, and it has a couple of different definitions depending on what specifications and standards that you look at and you use. Now, why are we talking about obsolescence? Well, I have to admit it was not something that I had planned on talking about, but at TDW-Live last year, a young man who I won't mention he asked the question after there was a massive debate about specifications, the role of specifications and the role of technology at TDW-Live last year. And when I say it was a debate, I think those of you that were there know that it was much more than a debate. And really, there were some challenges that were being faced by lots of teams, and there was some frustrations coming from some of the vendors in the room in terms of having to support specifications. Now, like I said, when this question came up, the question of obsolescence, initially I thought it was a red herring, and it was kind of something that we really didn't want to talk about at the conference. That was until something happened to us earlier on this month at TDW, which kind of gave me a eureka moment. And that eureka moment was, that's the obsolescence he was talking about, not the traditional obsolescence that you and I as engineers understand. So what do we understand of obsolescence? Okay, so where am I today? I am at what used to be RAF Tangmere, and the Military Aviation Museum here has kindly given me permission to do some filming here, and we've got Lewis behind the camera, and like I say, I'm here at RAF Tangmere. Now, RAF Tangmere, in her day, during the First and Second World War, was one of the most strategically important airfields that we had on the south coast of England, and she was strategically important for a number of different reasons. And without turning this into a history of Tangmere Airfield, which I don't want to do, Tangmere Airfield actually closed in 1970, so she became obsolete to military requirements. But she was so important during World War I and World War II. She was actually accidentally discovered by an RAF pilot who had to make an emergency landing before World War I, and went back to the Air Ministry in London and said, what a great place for an airfield, that's where we should put an airfield. So the ministry bought up all the land off the local parish here and built an airfield. And over the years we've had Americans, Canadians, British, Polish squadrons all stationed in and around the supporting airfields of Tangmere. Now, Tangmere during the Second World War was strategically important because she serviced the Lysander aircraft that used to leave here at the dead of night and fly over to France, and they used to drop off the spies, the clandestine kind of operations that were designed to gather and capture intelligence and disrupt enemy activity. So why today is she in this state? Well, in 1970, as I said, the ministry decided, and the Ministry of Defence decided, that Tangmere Airfield was now obsolete. She was no longer fulfilling a role, or a vital role, as she was doing previously. Now, why was that? Well, that's because of a couple of different reasons. One is warfare had changed. We'd moved from conventional warfare to more of the Cold War kind of era, more intelligence-based warfare. But the second reason, and probably the most important reason, is that technology had moved on. And in terms of the Hurricanes and the Spitfires that used to fly from here, the airfield could no longer support the faster jets, the technology advancements of aircraft. Now, before she closed, she was handed to the Army as a signals radar calibration station, but even then, as radar has changed and become obsolete, the service station that was here was no longer needed. So today, RAF Tangmere is now, unfortunately, despite emotional attachment by many, is now a housing estate and has been turned back into agricultural land beyond the tower there. So that is one definition of obsolescence as we understand it. What we're going to do now is we're going to move back down to the museum, and we're going to talk about the second kind of obsolescence as engineers that we're much more familiar with, and then we're going to talk about the obsolescence that was actually being spoken about at the conference. Great. Okay, so I've moved from the tower, which is on the other side of what remains of the airfield, and it was actually great fun being allowed to drive the car across the airfield there. So many thanks to the guys here at the museum. But I've moved down to the museum, and I'm actually in the car park, which has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 aircraft here in the car park, all of which are obsolete. They've all been retired. That's what we understand to be obsolescence. This is what we understand in terms of equipment becoming obsolete, not what the gentleman at the conference was asking, might I add. And I'm going to come on to that when I move around to the NAFI very, very shortly. And I'm going to treat myself to a nice NAFI coffee. But like I say, behind me is the Westlands Wessex. And I remember the Westlands Wessex actually still in service when I was in the forces. And I'm still a relatively young man. And the Wessex was flying around Northern Ireland when I did my first tour of Northern Ireland, and it was still there, although the last few were in service, but they were still useful. They were still delivering a service from the RAF to their customer, which at the time would have been the Army, and they were flying those forces around Northern Ireland. Now, of course, famously, the last real major conflict that the Wessex would have been involved with was probably the Falklands. But this obsolescence question, this is what we understand to be real traditional obsolescence. It's now here taking pride of place in the car park. Now, you might hear in the background here, there's some volunteer ex-RAF engineers, etc., looking after these aircraft. And that's going to take me on to the next part of the obsolescence tale. And we're going to talk about that when I move around the corner and we set up for a coffee. Now, so as I say, the Wessex and the Harrier and all of these things that are parked up now in this car park have all become obsolete. Now that is obsolescence as we understand it. Now let's try and move on to the obsolescence that was being asked of us at the conference. Okay, so I've retired to the NAFI, and those of you who know what the NAFI is, it's the Navy, Army, Air Force Institute cafeteria. It's a British institution, and it is something that all servicemen, British servicemen, are fond of. Now, I've retired here. The wind has picked up a fraction, and you can probably hear the flagpoles behind me rattling away. Now, so it brings me to the point. What is the point, and what was the question that was asked at the conference? Well, at the conference, the question was, all of these specifications are great, but what about obsolescence? And as I mentioned down by the tower, the immediate thought that came into my head was two different kinds of obsolescence. We've got the military station here at Tangmere, of which this remains and is now the museum. Or we have the Wessex aircraft that I was stood by, and I panned around and we had a look around at some of the other aircraft, and you were lucky enough to see an ex-RAF engineer actually still maintaining one of the Harriers. Now, that was the image of obsolescence that came into my mind, and which is why I ignored the question at the conference. Now, what he actually meant actually came to me about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where the camera that you are watching us on right now required a software update. Now, that camera that we're talking about here, it's a Sony Handycam Semi-Pro machine, is only 4 or 5 years old. It's not very old at all, yet it needed a software update. Now, we thought that would be a real easy task for us to do. We thought it would be a plug it in, download the installer and drag it across to the camera. Now, in theory, that's what you thought would happen. Now, we downloaded the update, and the first thing the update did was it complained that the system that we were trying to use the update on to get it to the camera was not supported, so it wouldn't run. So we contacted Sony and said, what do we need to do? And they said, oh, you need to run it on a 32-bit system. Well, we don't have any 32-bit systems in the company anymore. We have the new 64-bit. So we had to hunt through our storage cases and our storage boxes to find a machine that we could get the update onto, so we could transfer it to this camera that you're watching me from. That is the obsolescence that this gentleman was talking about. Not the fact that our products may retire and become obsolete, which is something that we can handle through a normal retirement of product process, whichever specification you follow. What he was talking about was when technology becomes obsolete, that's supporting our tech data. Now, when you put it into that context, it actually makes sense. Now, at the conference, I spoke fondly and proudly of being a bit of a technology snob. I like to have gadgets. I love having technology around me, but there are times that I would prefer to pick up a book. Now, here at the museum, they've been very accommodating today, although you can hear they're all very excited that I'm here with the camera, but they have provided me with a copy of a technical manual that they have for the Meteor, which you would have seen out there in the car park as I panned around. Now, what's the point I'm going to make here? Well, the medium of this technical information, a printed book which came into service in 1951, 70 years ago almost, is now as valid today as it was the day it came into service. What that means is, when this first came into service, the engineer, who's probably long retired now, I mean, the first amendments were done on the 16th of the 2nd, 1951. This guy's probably long retired, and he's probably enjoying playing golf or whatever people do when they're retired. And this book is no longer anywhere or anything to do with him. But this air publication is still accessible to me today, coming into the museum, and just to demonstrate a point, they gave me the manual and I picked it up and I can read a whole raft of maintenance procedures. Now, they are a very dedicated bunch here at the museum, and they are maintaining these aircraft as if they were still flying aircraft. So they are very attached to these manuals, and I've had to promise to guard it with my life. Now, the point I'm making here is that the medium of the book has not become obsolete, which I can't say the same for my technology. I can't say that. I've already demonstrated that the camera, which is 4 years old, was so super hard for us to update. A job that should have taken us 5 minutes took us nearly 3.5 hours all in to find a machine, to contact Sony, to get an update onto the camcorder, which incidentally didn't fix the problem, but that's a completely different story. So the obsolescence that the gentleman was talking about, I nearly keep mentioning your name, the obsolescence the guy was talking about was that technology obsolescence. And this kind of obsolescence actually gets worse. It gets worse because specifications change, technology changes, but our requirement for tech data does not change. So you can see why people are still attached to their books. You can see why people still want their paper manuals. Opening IETPs that were developed in the 90s, of some that I was involved with, will now no longer run unless you run some kind of VMware or if you run some kind of old machine. So now IT departments have to have a strategy for dealing with the medium of being able to deliver tech data and the obsolescence of that medium. Now, on TDW this month, we're going to do a tutorial on the 5 things that you need to look out for when it comes to selecting a software solution and delivering tech data to your end customer. And we are going to include a portion on obsolescence. Obsolescence should now, technology obsolescence or medium obsolescence should now form part of your tech data strategy. And if you have not been on to TDIQ and looked at the 2-hour workshop, that presentation that we gave at last year's TDW-Live conference, we have now made available that tutorial to members so you can look at the important things that you need to look at when it comes to TD. And we're going to update it, and we're going to do another one and talk about obsolescence and the kind of strategies that you need to employ when it looks not just about the product being retired, but about the data that's being out there in the field and the technology that's supporting your data becomes obsolete. Only this week I received a phone call from a vendor saying that they had heard that a critical part of their software solution for the production of tech data was being retired and they didn't know what to do. Now that's the kind of strategy that we need to consider as tech data professionals, and we need to include in any tech data strategy. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it absolutely thought-provoking, useful, and a little bit more fresh because we came out into the big wide world. I apologise for any wind noise or flag noises that you might hear going around. I hope that it was enough to generate some thought for you to discuss TD strategies within your organisation. A massive thank you to the guys here at what was once RAF Tangmere but is now the Military Aviation Museum. They have been very accommodating and they have answered all of my questions. They looked at me a bit strange when I started asking about tech data and why would a young man like me be interested in old publications, but once I explained, they were actually very enthusiastic. The majority of them are ex-military anyway, so they kind of got where I was coming from. Remember, you can go and create your free account over on the members area of our website. If you like what you saw, please subscribe below and share amongst all of your TD professionals, friends and colleagues. Keep an eye on the website because we will be doing a tutorial on handling and having a strategy for technology obsolescence. I'm Michael Ingledew, and from RAF Tangmere, goodbye.